Back to another episode of Black Life Amplified. It is the virtual town hall series hosted by the African American Leadership Forum, Insight News, Minnesota Community Care, the Spokesman Recorder, as well as Children's Minnesota and North Point. This is the town hall where we focus on Black life and celebrate it, being Black, being proud, being strong. And on today's episode, we are focusing on Black life post-election. We have experienced a tremendous amount of what some would consider election fatigue, given the polarization of our nation in this moment. But despite all of that, there's an opportunity for us to continue to mobilize collectively and to continue to engage and activate our community, as well as holding those newly elected officials accountable, which is what we'll be focusing on today's conversation. Before getting started, I do want to say thank you to our sponsors who make this town hall possible, the Minneapolis Foundation, North Point Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelist on today's conversation. Up first, Ms. Adriene Thornton, who is a nurse and infection preventionist at Children's Minnesota. Welcome, Adriene. Thank you for being here, as always. And then up next, we have Angela Rose Myers. She is the newly elected president to the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP. Welcome, Angela. Also joining us is Miss Anika Bowie, who is the founder of Run Like Harriet, a new organization dedicated to getting you civically engaged and helping move candidates from voters to elected officials. Welcome, Anika.
Oh.
And then last but certainly not least is Cindy Kaigama, who is the Director of Innovation and Learning at Minnesota Community Care. So Cindy, thank you for being here as well. We're excited to have you transition from partner to now panelist as well. So I want to go ahead and start just asking everyone one question, and then we'll pivot into our conversation about COVID as we always do. So up first, I just want to ask, in this moment, we've seen the results of the election. We know who our newly elected officials are going to be. What is your initial reaction, or just a small 2-minute reaction to who we've now elected into leadership? Cindy, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I am hopeful that we will be able to move our country into a direction that will be equitable and inclusive for all people. I'm also hopeful that as we look at the current state where we're in holding pattern with the state of Georgia, that we'll be able to have opportunities to push policies forward that will provide healthcare and access and positive experiences, that we can get our country in a place of connectedness and without being perfect, but at the same time that we can move forward and heal from the things that we've experienced and be able to come together as a people to make sure that we are taking care of our communities nationally, locally, and abroad.
Absolutely. How about you, Anika? Now that the election results are in, how are you feeling about this current moment that we're in?
Well, I'm feeling like we are in the best position strategically, right? And I feel like we are in a position to actually have healing take place, to have reparative justice take place, and also to really amplify and deepen those relationships that many of our generations have built with not only the Biden administration, but even here in Minnesota locally, the relationships that have taken place to where we can move our strategic vision forward further now with our newly elected officials versus the ones that we did not have previously.
Absolutely. Angela, what does this moment mean to you?
I think that this is a moment to definitely celebrate Black women and the work that as organizers we've done to get to this point. And it doesn't matter even if it comes to candidates, right? Like across local elections, there were Black women who were involved with getting out the vote and being so involved in the campaigns and different campaigns around the state and in the country. So this is really a time to celebrate our wins, to take that learning and to go forward for our future as well. And I hope to see even more Black women candidates run in the future, and taking not just candidates, but, campaign managers, treasurers, on every aspect of a campaign, we've learned so much, and we've learned our power, and we've learned how to really strategically initiate our power in these campaigns. And so I hope going forward, we'll see that power grow and we see more organizing happening.
Absolutely. Now, Adrienne, I want to ask you the same question, but to also provide our audience the context that not only are you a Black woman who's experiencing the impact of the election, as we all are, but you are an infection preventionist. You directly work with those directly impacted by COVID. So what is this entire moment, both the pandemic as well as the social uprising and the political polarization, what does that look like and mean for you?
Well, let's start with, I partied on election night. I have been dancing ever since.
Good for
I have
you.
been wearing my pearls. I see you have your
That's
pearls on,
right.
Miss Brittany.
Absolutely.
I have been wearing my pearls to represent Miss Kamala, and I will do that every day for the next 5 years because it is just wonderful. From a political standpoint, it was just wonderful to see people come together, to see our young people really activated. That's what was most exciting for me, was we got our young people activated and engaged in the whole political process in ways we haven't seen before. And so for me, that was really exciting. And then from a pandemic standpoint, I am really excited that next year I will be able to go to the beach without a mask. That is the plan. Because the incoming administration, they have a plan. They have a good plan. And they are building off of what we had before it was destroyed by the current administration. So things like reinstituting the pandemic response team that was in place, reinstituting the CDC, having global partnerships and offices so that we can monitor things in other countries in real time and prepare our own citizens for what's coming. And so I am just really excited. I'm happy. It's kind of hard for me to be sad at this point in life. I mean, my dog chewed up something and I was like, oh, that's okay. Biden and Kamala gonna be in office soon. You just chew that up. It's like, I feel like a weight has been lifted off of my chest and I feel like I can breathe again. Now, I still know that there are people who are not happy about the situation. And so I am still very aware that this doesn't end everything. It won't end the racism. It won't end the health disparities. It won't end the fact that people hate people like you and all of our panelists just because of the color of our skin. But you know what? It goes a long way to starting to repair some of the issues and the ills in this country. So I'm excited. I'm happy. And I just do a happy dance every time I think about them taking over in office and looking at what they're doing now in terms of who they're putting in place to manage everything just makes me more excited. So I'm excited. That's where I am.
Good. Well, your happiness and your excitement is infectious. And that's exactly the type of energy that we need right now, is people feeling like we have something to look forward to, exploring the possibility of, can we as Black Americans actually breathe in this country and feel safe and to be affirmed? We do know that representation matters, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the conversation. But right now, I do want to continue talking to you, Adrienne, specifically about COVID. You mentioned that the incoming administration actually has a plan. They have a full COVID response team in place, and that they believe in science. Science is coming back to the White House. Like, what a philosophy. So based on the incoming administration and the ways in which they've committed to responding to COVID, how do you anticipate that the pandemic will pivot and also be treated moving forward?
Well, I think it's going to receive the priority attention that it deserves and it should have had from the beginning. So one of the problems that we've had is that we haven't had a national directive. We haven't had a national plan. And so you've had people interpreting things and guidelines, the way they want to, interpreting what the CDC has put out as guidance, to fit their own personal needs, rather than what is best for the country. And so one of the things that I envision us having, and Joe Biden has said it, is that he is going to put out a national strategic plan to manage the pandemic. He is going to give governors directives that they should follow. And he is going to hold people accountable and ask our elected officials to, in his words, buttress the guidance from the White House. And even further than that, instead of telling them what to do, he is going to rely on our scientific community to guide and direct those decisions. So going back to relying on the CDC to provide the science and the guidance and to tell us what we should be doing, as opposed to us taking their guidelines, dichotomizing them, breaking them up, cutting them up, and making them fit our own personal needs, which is not based on science. And so I think going forward, we will have a more robust response. And, people need to understand that this is not going to go away. It will get better. We will manage it. And then, maybe a year, 2, 3, 4 down the road, we'll have another pandemic of some sort. If you think back to 2009, when H1N1 entered the scene, we thought, okay, if we can just get through this, we're going to be okay. And then President Obama decided, you know what? I don't think this is the end. The scientists were telling him, this is going to happen again at some point. We don't know when, we don't know what, but we should be prepared. And so he put in place a team that was supported by the White House. It ran out of the White House to manage and deal with these types of things. And then in 2018, the current administration got rid of that team. And so to blame everything on the WHO and say, oh, well, they're inadequate, they should have seen this coming, they should have prepared better. All of that may be true, but at some point, we need to admit that we dropped the ball in getting rid of that team that could have responded and helped the U.S. plan better for how to deal with this pandemic. And so all of those things will come into play, hopefully, with the new administration. Their plans are to bring those things back. Of course, it will depend on, some of the elections coming up in January, because it's going to be difficult to get anything passed through as quickly as they want to if we don't have a better balance of power. But I'm hopeful. I am hopeful, and I'm positive that this pandemic, the response will be better. The resources will be put in place so that people can better prepare for how do we get the vaccines out to the people that need them? How do we get them out quickly? How do we address the health disparities that existed before the pandemic, but got worse during the pandemic? And they have addressed that. Mr. Biden and Kamala have addressed that in their COVID plan. They have a disparities task force that will be looking specifically at the health disparities related to COVID-19. And then after the pandemic is over, that will become a permanent task force within the administration. So I'm excited. I think that things will get better. I think with a mandatory mask mandate, which Joe Biden has said multiple times we need it, and that as soon as he is in office, he will put a mandatory mask mandate in place. We'll see a huge difference in how this pandemic is spreading. We have the science. We know that wearing masks work. I mean, if you look at, I think it was Australia or either Austria, one of them, but they had a national mask mandate, and everyone got on board and said, okay, well, the government is telling us that, based on the science, this is what works, so let's everybody just do it. Everyone stayed home for several weeks. Only people who had to go to hospitals to work were allowed to come out of their house, and maybe other essentials. But I think our essential list was a little extensive in the U.S. in the beginning. And so theirs was a little more limiting, but they only had to do that limiting for a short amount of time. And now their kids are in school, they're able to go to work, their economy is starting to recover. And so we can learn from other countries that have followed the science. And so I look forward to the U.S., doing what other countries have done, listening to our experts and letting them lead us through this pandemic, as opposed to people trying to lead the pandemic in a way that fits their own personal needs.
Exactly. Exactly. We can be learning from other countries, and we can be learning from people right here in our own backyards. Cindy, I want to pivot to you. Your family has been significantly impacted by COVID. Would you be willing to share some of what your family has experienced and what it's taught you about this pandemic and how to navigate it?
Yes, thank you. So in the beginning of the pandemic, my sister was working in California at a hospital, and she was infected along with 12 other people, and they had to shut that hospital down. Within a couple of weeks later, I'm originally from Detroit, so I had a host of people, friends and family members, who died within one day. I had 7 people die. That's close to me. And then there was a situation where my sister, who was first tested negative, and then a week later, she was in a hospital with COVID pneumonia. She almost died. Her whole body shut down. Her kidney shut down. She was in the hospital for a month. And then she went back, and she was sick for a total of 3 months. At one point, she was on oxygen, and she couldn't even breathe without the oxygen. And she had to use it for everything from brushing her teeth to getting up and walk, where she couldn't leave the house at all. So it was very painful for me. And I helped try to navigate, actually, because of the people who were impacted by me closely. And we created a panel, and some of the people maybe on Facebook Live were a part of that, where within 1 week after all of the things that we experienced, we created a session online, a virtual session about coming together and helping us to support each other so that we can overcome grief in the midst of the experiences that we had of all of our family members and people across the globe who were dying from this pandemic. At the same time, it was also amazing because I was furloughed, and it ended up being a blessing in disguise because I ended up being able to come and work for Minnesota Community Care. And as a person who has done this work for a very long time in community and giving access to people and being an advocate, it allowed me to be able to see that in the midst of a crisis that we still can come together and we still can to support each other. And it may not be in the way that we're used to, but how do we support each other and just to say it's going to be okay. From a personal lens, it's allowed me to focus on what's important. I have 2 children that are home with me, and I had to onboard a 5-year-old to virtual learning, and that has been a challenge every day. And then I also have a 7-year-old, and I was very stressed out with work and, still people dying and being sick. And I finally one day said, I can't control a lot of this stuff, so I'm just going to let it go. And if my children don't pass kindergarten and 2nd grade, I'm more focused on them staying alive, and they'll be okay. So that's something that I think all of us are in this space right now, where we have to figure out what's important. What are things that are adding value to our lives immediately now, and the impact that it has on us across the board. I have come in contact with people who think that this experience is fake. They didn't think it was real. They thought it was made up. And then when I shared my story about within a week, I had my godmother who was alive 1 week. She had just shared her famous sweet potato pie recipe with me. The next week she was dead from COVID and complications of COVID because her sister had the virus, but she didn't have any symptoms. So she was hugging and kissing her and all over her. And a week later, she had infected 10 other people. And one of those people were my aunts, my godmother. So I have had a lot of people die from this virus. Personally, it caused me a lot of grief. I had never experienced loss like that in my life, where I had so many people die at one time, and I didn't know how to navigate it. So I knew there were other people around. So me being who I was, I put together a panel similar to this, and we had a conversation, and we talked about grief and loss and created ways that we can help each other. So I think that is something that has help me to still move forward. And when I do this work, I try to be very sensitive, because in my role as a director of innovation and learning, my job is to champion equity, uplift our patients, and and promote people from the lens of equity in care delivery and also in our community. So I want to make sure that I'm sensitive to where we are right now in this space in the middle of a pandemic, and how our populations, African American communities and other minority groups, are having this experience at the highest rate in comparison to other demographics. Although the demographic is changing now, where, everybody's being impacted in a way, whereas before it was just impacted in our community, so it was treated differently. But now that it's exposed at a higher level, then there's some different things that are happening. But at the same time, I want to be very conscientious that we are in the middle of a pandemic. So as we move and do our work in this organization, that we need to be sensitive that it may be a person that their family have just passed away, or they lost their job. So we need to be able to be present and listen and be helpful to our patient population in this time and space. Also, I want to say, in regards to our organization, is we are offering community testing. We are in St. Paul Public Schools, and normally we have a school-based clinic, and normally our therapists are there to provide care in the school setting. But as a result of COVID-19, we transitioned to telehealth services. We are still available in the St. Paul Public Schools. We're Dorothy Day, we're downtown. We are also in St. Paul Public Housing as well. So we are working across the Ramsey County and in St. Paul area to be able to provide access and community testing. We also provide health care for people, no matter what their rate of income is. We offer a sliding scale. So even if you don't have insurance, you can still come to our organization. We will service you and provide you the highest quality of care.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those really personal details, as well as the details about how those within our audience and community can also receive care. Both are incredibly important. And you bring up a really great point about there are people who still don't believe that COVID-19 is a real thing, that we're in a pandemic, and that this is a political hoax or something of that nature. And I want to ask Anika, Anika, I mentioned that you are the founder and CEO of Run Like Harriet, but you are also the vice president of the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP, who has been working with the Minnesota Department of Health to spread information about COVID-19, particularly within the Black community. I'm curious to hear from you and Angela as well. What do you think the disconnect is inside the Black community to where some of our people still don't take the virus seriously? Is it a lack of information? Has the virus become too politicized? Or is it simply just a lack of access to equitable care, to testing, to mask wearing, that type of thing? What's the disconnect within the Black community?
Well, I can go first. I think it's all three of those things that you had mentioned. But one of the things that is the underlying current of all those three barriers that prevent our community to really getting care, or trusting care, is historical trauma of racism. You know, we have to also understand the history of the medical community and how its industry was built off of, you know, the exploitation of our bodies. And that truth and that history still exists within our DNA. And it's still, even though our community probably doesn't have a way to process and really contextualize, you know, what that historical trauma is in our bodies, but that still exists to where we, you know, still have not getting over other things around syphilis, right? When we think about the Tuskegee experiment, and some of those fears still exist within our community because we have not really repaired and restored and rectified those conversations around racist practices that have existed within the medical field. Now, I don't believe that, you know, just talking about racism alone will be the catalyst to building trust. I think also our public health communities, our public health leadership must, you know, acknowledge that history, right? Because that is a barrier that many of our communities are dealing with. And I think also too, in our education system, we know here in Minnesota, although we have the highest performing schools overall when it comes to majority of our students, of our white students, but we have also some of the widest achievement gaps or opportunity gaps when it comes to our Black students, and how that effect of our education and what we actually have access to in our education classrooms around biology, right? Around chemistry, around, I can only tell you a little bit about, my experience or education with public health, just based off of my relationship with my community, my family, what has been taught down to us. And I think also our African American community are naturally herbalists. We like holistic type of medical care, right? We have gained a distrust of medicine or vaccines just because there hasn't been enough education given to our communities. So I think with investing and talking about what the virus means through credible messengers, and that's what the Minneapolis NAACP has been. We've been credible messengers, making sure that we are giving this information in tangible ways. We don't have all the answers, but we are allowing our community, engaging our community with asking us questions. And I think one of the greatest things that we do have here in Minnesota compared to other states or even other countries in the world is that we actually have closer proximity to resources to help with other preventative measures around like food access, helping, with the economy. And if someone is able to make sure they have a roof over their head, then they'll be more in a position to make sure that their health is well taken care of. So helping folks with their basic needs is a really great way for folks to get into a place of sustainability, to be in a place of looking at their health holistically, trusting information that's coming from our stakeholders, trusting information that's coming from our government leaders. So that's the whole work of Run Like Harriet as well too. And I love that it's coming from a lens of a historical context, so where we really have a historical context around racism, around emancipation, around the historical trauma of slavery and how we have gotten here off of the just pure self-determination, right? And power and resiliency and faith and love and a vision for, forward-looking strategy. But what we are also dealing with is having an opportunity for people to process, for us to acknowledge that yes, racism does have an impact on how we are engaging or how these systems are engaging with us.
Absolutely. Angela, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would just say practically for something that people can do going forward, even if you have been outside, if you go to work regularly, please take the test. So this is a precautionary measure. Even if you don't believe you have any symptoms, you don't experience any symptoms, take the test, and, that's something that I think that unfortunately, the early tests and the early marketing of the test, I saw more things on TikTok and Instagram of people going like, whoa, like I don't want to take that.
Exactly.
And people talking about, how preventative and how useful those tests are. Good thing is that there, you can still get the all the way up the nose test, so you can get a lower nose test, and then you can also get a saliva test as well. So, there are a lot of options and there's a lot of availability. I would say that the saliva test, you have to go a little searching for it. A lot of times the no appointments, walk up clinics that, we see advertised a lot are the all the way up to the nose, but I'll tell you, it is, yes, humbling, but you'll get through it because now you know. And it's better to know, and it's better to go forward as that precautionary measure than to, unfortunately, spread that to your friends and family. And so it's really, we won't know the full case number of how many people have COVID until everybody is tested. Right now, with resources being limited, we're trying to make sure that people in our community know that there are resources in our community. There are walk-up clinics that you don't need an appointment for. There are a lot of resources for you all. But, if you do not know and you have not been tested, or the last time you were tested was months ago and you've been going on your merry life, going outside, things like that, get tested, get tested.
Thank you for that, Angela. It's really important context. I would agree with you that the branding around COVID-19 and how to get tested initially was done very poorly, because let's be honest, no one wants to willingly have, some type of swab shoved all the way up their nose. And thankfully there is the saliva test now and other options for the way in which testing is administered. But I think that's part of the work that we have to do now, is even removing the stigma and possibly fear and apprehension that has come with getting tested for COVID-19. I want to pivot to Adriene now, based on something that Anika actually said earlier about the historical context of distrust within the Black community of the medical system. And she mentioned the Tuskegee experiments. And Adriene, you've mentioned before that your uncle was actually a part of the Tuskegee experiments, and yet and still that hasn't impacted your desire to participate in the vaccine trials and your willingness and interest as soon as possible. So from your perspective, having your family history as well as your knowledge as an infection preventionist, how do we acknowledge our history and also make sure that we're keeping our community safe today with the available resources that the medical industry provides today?
Yeah, so, that's a loaded question, and it was actually my grandfather.
Your grandfather.
And and that's important because we do have some residual effects from that. So for instance, thank goodness you can't see me on camera because I have a blanket and fuzzy socks around my feet because I have what's called Raynaud syndrome. Mm-hmm. And what happens is my hands and my feet are basically always cold. And even if I am sitting in front of my fireplace and it's, nice and warm and toasty, my hands and my feet are generally always cold. And so the story that's been passed down through my family is that we all have that because as a result of my grandfather being in the Tuskegee experiment. Now, whether that's true or not, we'll never know, but that is the story that has been passed down from my aunt to my uncles and to me and my cousins. And so that is something that we have to deal with on a daily basis. Now, with that said, being in the medical profession, and especially in infection prevention and control, I am quite aware of some of the issues that were around the Tuskegee experiment. So, we didn't have institutional review boards, which are now a requirement for any type of human experiment. And so, there are things put in place now to prevent something like a Tuskegee from happening again. That doesn't mean it won't happen, but what I always tell people is if you are afraid or you don't understand or you're not sure about something, you need to find someone that you trust and talk to them. And so I have several friends that are in the medical field, and my director, Patsy Stinchfield, she and I are actually very close. We are more than colleagues. She is more like a sister to me. And so I trust her literally with my life and my children's life. And she actually participates on the ACIP board of CDC, which is the decision-making group. They make all the vaccine decisions for the United States. And so she is looking at all of the data for the vaccines on a regular basis. She's reading the science, she's interpreting it, looking at it for every company. And so I trust her. And so even though I am a big proponent of our Black community being involved in different trials of anything, not just vaccines, we are very underrepresented in all research. And so, I really am a big proponent because we don't know how these treatments and modalities are going to impact our community until we start getting them. And perhaps there is something else that needs to be done for us. We don't know because we don't participate. And so, like you said, I am a big proponent of participating in the vaccine trials. And, I am aware that there may be issues. I've seen the TikTok videos where people are shaking vigorously to that funny song and, they're kind of wilding about. And, we haven't seen that happen. And so I just have to remind people that what you see on TikTok is not necessarily true. But, to the medical community, perhaps we need to get out of our box and go to TikTok as well, so that we can present this information in a fun way that is not as intimidating, that people will understand it, believe it, maybe generate more questions and move people to asking more questions, to finding those trusted resources so that we can, be more involved and more engaged in the process. And, even with all of my issues with, my cold hands and feet, and the fact that, I see the end result of COVID not being under control. I see the children suffering. I see the parents stressed out from their children suffering, and it's hard. It is very hard. There have been many days where I just have to stop working so I can cry, because it is so devastating to these families, and it devastates us because we feel like our hands are tied. There's nothing we can do to help them, even though we're doing all we can do. And so to that end, I will be going this week. Health Partners has a phase 3 trial for the AstraZeneca vaccine. And it's for all of our listeners, if you go back and look at some of our prior town halls, we did have one of the physicians who happens to be Black, who is working on that phase 3 trial. We had him on, and he talked more about the vaccine trial. And so this week I will go in, and I don't know if I'm going to get the vaccine or not. It is a double-blind study. And what that means is the researchers don't know. They can't pick and choose who gets what. It's a random assignment of who gets the vaccine and who gets salt water. And they don't know who it is, because you are assigned a research number as opposed to using your name. And so that's where the double blind part comes in, because it is a random selection of who gets what, and then the researchers don't know. And so that's one of the additional protections for people, is that they can't pick and choose, oh, we're going to give this group of people the vaccine to see what happens, just because. We can't do that anymore. And so I'm actually quite excited. I'm doing it closer to the end of the week, because one of the things that we found out with the vaccine is that there is a robust immune system response to it. And so if I happen to get the vaccine, I am expecting to be slightly tired, have some arm pain, maybe need to stay in the bed a little longer over the weekend. And that's fine. That's my immune system responding to this foreign body that's just been injected into it. And I expect that to happen if I happen to be one of the people selected to get the vaccine. And I'm excited because I want to do my part to protect my family and my community. You know, I have a special needs son, and his immune system is very fragile. And even with the flu vaccine, he still tends to get the flu every year because his immune system just isn't strong enough. So it's up to me to protect him, as well as all of his friends who have the same issues and the rest of our community. You know, we're a community, and I have to look out for everyone, not just me, not just him, but everyone. And so that is my half glass full stance. And I know some people say, oh, well, that's fine for you, but I'm not doing it. You know, I can't control what other people think and do. What I can do is be an example of what we can do and what we should be doing, and be a resource to others so that people have questions. Even if I don't have the answers, I know where to go to get those answers, which is more important, I think, than having the answers to everything. So, you know, I'm excited. We'll see how I do. I'll talk to you all on Monday for our meeting, and we'll see how I feel then.
I was already going to say, just know that on Monday, I'm going to have questions for you. I want to know all your business and how you're doing. And for our final town hall of the year, happening 2 weeks from now, we'll definitely check back in and talk about, if you're comfortable with it, what your experience was like, and for other people who may choose to participate, what they can expect. And also, if anyone in our audience is interested in hearing about the COVID-19 vaccine trial and our discussion of it on a previous town hall, if you go to the African American Leadership Forum Facebook page or its YouTube page, that episode was called Black Maternal Health, COVID-19 and Medical Mistrust. And Dr. Zeke is the doctor that was working on the vaccine trial, who Adrienne was referring to, and he provided us with a wealth of information on how the trials work and kind of what they're working towards. So I want to pivot just a little bit and get into more about the election and what we can expect. As you mentioned, Adrienne, perhaps if the Minnesota Department of Health and other entities started using TikTok and other, unique opportunities to engage with community, we may have a different response. Information may travel in a way that it's not currently traveling, and we may see a better chance of participation from our community in mask wearing, social distancing, proper hand hygiene, etc. The messaging really does matter, but also so does the messenger. Something that I'm really looking forward to with the incoming Biden-Harris administration is that their communication team is all women. To my knowledge, this is the first time in our nation's history that we've seen this many women in a White House communications team, let alone the entire team. And there are a few women of color on that team as well, which makes it even more sweet. I want to hear from you, Cindy, as we're looking forward at this diverse administration, from Kamala Harris being the first Black woman, Jamaican woman, Indian woman, VP-elect, to people like Simone Sanders being the senior spokesperson for the VP. What are you anticipating the response will be to a new set of women, particularly Black women, in the Oval Office?
I'm excited because I think that we traditionally have cared. I mean, if we just look at Georgia, let's look across the country, we've been in spaces where we have pulled the numbers to bring them in to help to make things happen across the country, across the globe. So I'm really excited because Kamala represents the entire globe in a sense that there's a woman of African diaspora, Caribbean diaspora, Indian, Asian diaspora. So she's representing the people, not just in her space as VP of our country, but also the world is looking at us. So I'm excited that I can now, my daughter is 5 years old, to say, hey, there's somebody who looked like you who was in office. I can say to my son, there's somebody who's looked like you who was in office with previous President Obama. So I'm really excited. I think this also may give an opportunity for other women who didn't think that there was hope. I saw a lot of images on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram about the ceiling being broken and her walking with Ruby Bridges. And those are opportunities that are exciting for me personally. I'm a child of a civil rights movement with my family, with my parents. My father was left for dead plenty of days so that Kamala can be right there. And I'm sure a lot of our relatives that are on this panel has done the same thing. So I'm excited about this opportunity. I'm also looking forward to the work that she'll do for us in not particularly us, but for people in a space of healthcare, in a space of social justice, in a space of public health and public safety. So I'm really curious about what that will look like. Kamala Harris will also be the determining factor of our Senate race if it goes to the Democratic Party, and she'll be the one that has to make the decision. So I'm also excited about and curious and hopeful what that will look like as well, because she'll be the one that will make that determination for our country. And that will have a huge impact on our organization from the lens of healthcare, creating more access and accessibility for people for insurance, so that we can continue to provide care for all people, no matter of their income, so that we can continue to have a sliding scale fee to offer. And it's not a strain on our care delivery service. It's not a strain on us from a lens of being able to provide access for all people. So I'm hopeful and I'm excited that this will move us in a different direction that will create a legacy for other women who look like us across the globe, that they can and will, no matter what level of government, if it's in your PTA, that you feel, oh, well, I can do that. It's a sister in office who looks just like me, so there's nothing I can't do now. So I'm getting emotional. This is coming from, sorry, I'm like, oh my God, this is really getting to me. I didn't think I would see this in my lifetime, so I'm emotional about it in a lot of different ways. And I'm hopeful that it will allow us to move in a better direction for our country and across the globe.
Well, I share that emotion with you. I think we all do. And I would agree. I didn't think that I would see this within my lifetime. And I am so glad that I did. And I'm so glad that my daughter gets to see this and that this gets to be normalized for her as well. And not just, you know, within the Oval Office, but all of the women, especially within the Twin Cities, who have been running for office and taking higher positions within companies and really representing. Anika, you run like Harriet, and you have been working to help Black women, especially, activate and run for office and really step into these positions of power and to own their inherent and ancestral power. Can you please speak to what your experience was like in running for office and also supporting the 40+ women within the Twin Cities who ran for office after the murder of George Floyd?
Yes, well, you said it so perfectly. The relationship to power has been a powerful experience, not only influencing other women and other folks to tap into their power, their ancestral power, their political power, their social, civic, economic power, their health power, right? There's so many beautiful capitals that we can tap into. And for me, my aspirations in politics started at a very early age. I was that kid who grew up loving the game of chess. I loved teaching chess, and also one of the things about chess is that there's so many different positions on the board, and it's a strategic game, right? Just like politics. And one of the things that I love about a Biden-Harris administration is that, like, now we can tune into a game that actually feels like rejuvenating, like we see ourselves, right? Versus, you know, the Trump administration feeling like a game of betrayal, a game of trauma, a game of disappointment, right? Of fear, of distrust. Now we can actually engage. And one of the things with my experience of running, and also what I saw and experience of so many Black women of color who had ran during this year, was them unpacking and literally seeing their power in ways that they didn't have the platform or wasn't pretty much forced to do, right? And one of those things is really understanding your power and understanding what your representation will contribute, right, to administration, to whatever office of governance. And one of the things that I really appreciate about that experience was really learning about those before us, right? Who contributed to us even having the right to vote, who contributed to us having policy to where racial discrimination within certain systems just doesn't exist anymore, is no longer legalized, right? Women who had contributed to even local politics and DFL politics and electoral justice in ways, right? Or even not even elections, but just working on committees, right? Being part of commissions and councils. And like the doctor was saying, being in places to where we're not really represented, right? And I think about the quote, you know, with Michelle Obama, her last speech, where she talked about her daughters growing up in the White House, right? In a house that was built by slaves, and how that resonates so deeply to where us reaping the fruits of our labor, right? And our labor in the medical industry, our labor in the political arena, our labor in community, right? Our labor of love that Black women have always given to this country. And now I think what's most important is that those 40 women now are influencing hundreds of women here, right here in Minnesota, who are going to run, who are thinking about running, who feel more bolder and braver and courageous to run, right? And one of the things that Run Like Harriet could do and will do and be a service is supporting them in their run, right? And I think we've also heard you know, the slogan that we give our brothers and sisters, our cousins, you know, who aren't really understanding voting on such an essential pillar, that you know, our ancestors died for us to vote, right? So how about we actually say our ancestors lived for us to run, right?
Absolutely.
Like we don't have to contribute to a death. We can contribute to them living and moving on and them going towards a better future for us to be here and for us to reap the benefits of like the hard labor and the work, and for us to also be in positions of power, right, where we can make decisions and open up the doors and give agency and access for those who need it the most, right, who have contributed to our community, but yet our current administration haven't created a lens or created mechanisms to really see, you know, our power. And for us to go into 2021, not from a deficit lens, not from a disparities lens, but from a lens of what is the strength, right? Like, how can we make sure we're preserving and we're investing in our communities that had paid the ultimate price for us to be here. And I think once those Black women, those over 40 Black women tapped into that power, I'm super excited for those who did make it across the finish line and did get elected, like Athena Hollins, Esther. There's so many folks who like came about, you know, through that call of action. And I also want to just share briefly too, that we understand that, you know, the life of our brother George Floyd was taken, right? And during that time, folks had to make decisions, right? But one of the things that Black women, we didn't have to make a new decision. We just walked already into our faith. So when he was in that horrendous video calling for his mother, something was stirring in the bellies of Black women. And it just so happened that certain women who understood their political power and utilized and cast their political currency to get inside of the political realm, so we can make sure that our lives, you know, are visible, right, when it comes to these debates, and that we are creating policy and agendas to where the first time this year we have seen the conversations of reparations become a mainstream conversation. We have seen the conversation of Black maternal health becoming more of a mainstream conversation. We have seen like the conversation around police abolition. We have seen the conversations that seemed very radical back in our day, but now being discussed on a national level. And I think that is the work and that is the power of Black women when they decide to run, when they decide to go after whatever leadership position that they feel is best for our community.
So very well said. I want to pivot to Angela right now. As Anika mentioned, we have the strength and the wisdom of those who came before us. And we also have the institutions and the evidence of their labor and the effectiveness of their labor. And we see that particularly within our legacy organizations, whether that is the NAACP or a National Panhellenic organization, a Black historical or fraternity or sorority. You and I both happen to be a part of the Divine Nine. You're a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. I'm a member of Zeta Phi Beta. Adrienne is a member of Delta Sigma Theta. These organizations have been around for 100+ years. The NAACP been around since 1909. We have real work and real progress that has been done before us. And now we have an opportunity to do work that's going to carry us through the next 100 years. What does it mean to you to be a part of two different legacy organizations? And what is your hope for the way in which our organizations will mobilize to support elected officials and to support particularly an agenda for the Black community?
Thank you. Yeah, so I want to make clear also that, I'm here as a representative of the NAACP, the Minneapolis NAACP, but I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And the powerful part of our legacy, particularly the NAACP's legacy and our cultural legacy, is that we as Black people have created organizations that centered our needs and our agenda, right? So the NAACP centered the advancement of colored people, of Black people, and we have always held true to centering the legacy, the culture, the ideas, and the people, that people part, And so I think it's interesting because there's always a question of like, oh, are these institutions useful today? You know, that's usually the question. And I believe that any institution that centers Black people and a Black future is definitely needed today. How we utilize it and how also these other barriers have come into these organizations, that's the point that we in these organizations, we need to analyze. So I'm gonna take the NAACP as an example. And you know, this is the organization I represent and I love wholeheartedly. But it is true that the NAACP is an older organization in membership. So we have a lot of elders. But it's also true that, you know, historically, a lot of the people who were the members of the NAACP came from a certain socioeconomic class, right? These are things that we can look at and say, you know, that's true. And what I'm going to do now that I'm in a leadership position is I'm going to reach out specifically to the younger generation. I'm going to reach out and specifically to those who are LGBTQ and LGBTQ communities. I'm going to reach out specifically to low income folks who are doing the work in our community, and not just as a way like, okay, what do you need? What can we collaborate on? But it's time. Here is the position that you can have here. You can be a part of it. You have a say in this organization because you have a right to be in this organization as well. So, you know, I'm really excited for the opportunities that we have. The Minneapolis NAACP in this recent election, every elected position was won by a Black woman. You know, every elected position that the Minneapolis NAACP had was won by a Black woman. That is amazing. You know, historically in civil rights organizations, you have Black women doing a lot of work, but getting very little recognition, right? That's changing. And we need to trust that it's changing as well as we get involved. And sometimes we're the change we want to see. We're the representation we want to see. And it's time to take, you know, a hold of that, because just because an organization has a legacy does not mean there are not opportunities. There are real opportunities with, you know, even when we're talking about Black sororities and Black fraternities. These are the opportunities for, you know, really talking about the issues that Black women or Black men or our Black community faces, and really talking about them in a way where we're centering our culture and centering what we know about our culture instead of having outside institutions control our conversation. So, you know, our tenets, when I'm talking in Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, you know, the tenets of Black families, supporting Black women, uplifting Black women, that is our legacy. Let's hold true to that going forward. And that is really a way for us to organize ourselves around issues. It doesn't always have to be political, but you know, there's every day, Brittany, you know this, every year we have Greek Day at the Capitol, you know, like where we talk about Black issues. And so there's ways to organize. It doesn't always have to be within an organized institution like, you know, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated or the NAACP, but that is what we need. We need more Black people to want to get involved relationally with each other to build power for our future.
You know, you bring up an incredibly important point about the power in our connectedness. One of the most exciting aspects of GOTV work in this past election cycle for me personally was being able to work alongside you and Anika and so many others who may be representing different organizations, but we are collectively mobilizing. You know, we did the D9, did the strolls to the polls together. It wasn't that Kamala Harris represented a particular organization and therefore we can't support her and we can't align. No, this is an opportunity. We see someone who looks like us, who has a shared experience, and this is an opportunity to lean in. It doesn't mean that we blindly agree with every policy that she may push forward. It doesn't mean that we don't collectively work towards holding Kamala, Joe Biden, and other elected officials accountable, but it means that we recognize that our humanity and our liberation is deeply connected in our relationships. A friend of mine, Alicia Steele, she always says the revolution is in the relationships. And I deeply, deeply believe that. I recently did an interview with Councilmember Andrea Jenkins. She is the vice counsel for the Minneapolis City Council. And she spoke about how she is both highly praised and well regarded, even got a shout out from Beyonce and from Lena Waithe and all of these Black celebrities that she looks up to. And also that she has faced a extreme amount of scrutiny as it relates to her leadership and just what the Minneapolis City Council has done, especially in response to the murder of George Floyd. And I'm curious to hear from you, Angela, or from Anika. What does it look like to hold our elected officials accountable while also still recognizing that they're humans, while also still recognizing that their representation matters and that we need them in office? How do we hold that unique juxtaposition of saying, I'm glad you're in that position, I want to see you win, I want to see you represent for our community, and I need to hold you accountable to making sure that you come through for what our community is depending on you for? Either one of you can go.
Yeah, well, I wanted to just say, like, on the very basic level of how politics has been presented historically to the Black community, politics is not fair in a lot of ways, you know, and it's so unfortunate that particularly when we're talking about like Andrea Jenkins or a lot of our Black leaders, they get unfair scrutiny and death threats and things like that that are not fair. And we as community members have to stand up to those portions of their scrutiny that is not fair and recognize that. But then we also have opinions, you know, and we are right and we have a duty to express our opinions as constituents and then also as citizens in this city, this state, and this country. We have a right to express our opinions, but to make sure that they are fair, and then to make sure that, you know, the way that we are expressing our opinions really can actually impact our leaders and our government. And so the great thing I think that really Minneapolis has is that our leaders are much more attuned to what, you know, the constituents are saying than in some other places around the country. You know, in Minneapolis, our leaders really do want to hear from us. We have public hearings, you know, we have a lot of avenues of access that our leaders have created and uphold. So, you know, it's really on us to take that responsibility and contacting them. There's currently, like, if we're talking about the future of public safety, there's a future of public safety survey that the city of Minneapolis put out because they want to hear from Minneapolis citizens and constituents. They want to hear from us. And also, one of the things is that we have to also know what's happening. One of the barriers historically from knowing what's happening is that a lot of the city council meetings happen during work hours. They happen on a random Tuesday at 10 a.m. That is not easy for everyone to get to and to learn about what's happening. And then also the general structure of how these meetings operate is extremely boring. It's not very easy to follow. But one of the things that COVID has blessed us with, and also this new technology age that we're in, is that all of these meetings are now online. You can go to the City of Minneapolis YouTube page, hit subscribe, hit the bells, and you can hear what's happening. And you can hear for yourself and determine for yourself what's happening. And you can then call in because they have the number. I have the YouTube page up right now. They have the number on the page when it's the public commentary period, the public hearing. They say, call in this number. This is our opportunity to call in and to say, you know, what's happening. Because this is that point where our laws are changing. Our laws are not static. They change. They change with the times and they change with who's in power. As we are having a transition in power and a transition in the time and a transition of crisis, right? This is the time that the laws are going to be made for our new future. So we need to be involved now more than ever in understanding what's going on. And in the public comments or public hearing, talk about what's happening and what our opinions are. And then if we're not happy with how our elected officials are listening to us, we need to hold them accountable, not just in the public sphere, but also running against them or finding and supporting other candidates to run against them, right? And so that is something that Anika could definitely talk about more than I can. And that's why I'm handing it off to her.
Oh, thank you, sis. It's such a good question about accountability. And I think that's something that we're still growing into. What does that mean, especially for like President Angela had mentioned around, you could really hold accountable what you actually are in relationship to, what you are actually engaged in. I think about, accountability from an interpersonal lens, right? And I think about just, what is successful and how have certain like in your personal life, your relationships, and how have you practiced accountability and how that translates right into our relationships with our political officials. And I think also too, about it's a quote that says what you water will grow, right? And I think if we water those relationships with ideas that are actually going to move us forward, our ideas to help get access, help with agency, help get more resources, or at least a representation, or get more Black folks in positions of oversight, of making decisions that actually aren't really as visible as an elected official, but probably even more powerful, right? If you are a board of a commission, right? I think about the amazing Dr. Josie R. Johnson, who was the Board of Regents for the U of M. And, and she didn't have to run for office. She gained that exposure through her service leadership and was appointed to that board that made significant changes, to a university that African Americans were, a small population there, but very, it was necessary for them to be engaged and for their education experience to be shaped through that leadership, right? I think accountability, is very complex and is based off of really what you need. And I think, for the Black community, sometimes we are positioned in positions of just need, that like it's been a challenge to really transform and educate our community to see the relationship to politics from a position of influence that is going to benefit our community. And I like what you said, Brittany, about realizing that these folks are human. It takes a lot of soul searching and healing and a lot of trust building and a lot of discipline, right, to be in these places and not want to flip a table. That's real, because we still see today, like Angela was saying, politics is not fair and there's a lot of deception, right, that exists. And that's why, what Run Like Harriet is a space to really tap into that ancestral and political power, because you have to have a very clear, conscious mind going into this game, even if it's around policy change. I think about, I'm part of this program called Community Equity Pipeline, right? And Mia is the program manager. And one of the quotes she had mentioned in this fellowship is that, engaging in policy change is for Black folks, for BIPOC communities, is asking them to constantly expose themselves to harm, right? Because this is a game that does not play fair. And but I think it's very important that we give our community the tools, the education, and also the lens of victory, the lens of empowerment, right? And also the literacy, the language of policy, so folks can actually have a fair chance, right, to actually get access to what they want through the political system.
Thank you. You both brought up some really, really important points about politics just being unfair, especially when you are a Black person and especially when you are a Black woman. One Black woman who I do feel like is finally getting some of the praise and recognition that she so much deserves is Representative Stacey Abrams. She, along with her organization, Fair Count, were partially responsible for flipping Georgia. Anika mentioned sometimes you got to flip a table. Well, this woman was a part of flipping an entire state. And so we are seeing some big changes down in Georgia. And so I want to pivot to Cindy and ask, all eyes are on Georgia right now. There is a runoff, but what does that mean and what should we be paying attention to right now?
So one of the things that I talked about as we were preparing for this is that I don't want us as a community to get comfortable and lax, right? Because what happens is when, depending on who's in office, our grind slows down. So we need to always continue to grind and be innovative and entrepreneurial and doing what we can to empower our communities. At the same time, this is a critical time for us in this country because this race will determine the future of the next 4 years of our country. So if we don't have a governance that aligns with the Democratic administration, it will be difficult for a lot of policies to move forward at the current state. So it's very important that we encourage our friends and families and relatives in Georgia to show up like they did when they showed up for the presidency, to go back and show up again for the Senate race, that they vote. That's very important. The other thing that we also need to acknowledge in local government and state government and also federal government is that we matter. And we are the change, and we're the people that can make the change as a group of people from, African-American women. We matter, and we need to be the ones that also align our communities to say, hey, this is important. Georgia is going to determine the entire election, and from a Congress level, it is huge. It's impactful in ways that we don't even realize. So just take where I work, for example. If it moves forward that it aligns with the the future administration, it'll be favorable for us as an organization and hopeful that we'll get better policies passed so we give more access to people. That, even with the bill that Tina Smith was putting forward for the Social Determinants of Healthcare Act 2020, that may be able to move forward. We can have funding and access so that we can actually be able to provide funding for people and organizations to improve the social determinants of health. There are other areas around the Affordable Care Act that will help us to be a safety net clinic, to be able to continue to provide access to people. If that changes and it goes in the other direction, then it will be a challenge possibly, because those don't necessarily align with the current administration from the lens of Republican in Congress. So in the Senate. So that's important, and we need to be able to recognize that. But at the end of the day, we still have to take care of our communities. We still have to look out for each other. And I'm empowered. I live in Scott County, and I know that before my goal in life is to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Like, that's something that I aspire to do. And with
something you will do.
Thank you. So I, for the first time, helped a woman, a Somali American woman. Actually, no, she was born in this country. So I helped her to help for running for Senate in our district. She didn't win, but the fact that she, where we live, that she got almost 14,000 votes as a woman from, the Ethiopian Somali culture, that speaks volumes to us in this county, because that means that she ran a good race, and we're looking to say, what can we do now in our county to be able to make impact for the people that represent us, so that we can move forward and hold, as you said earlier, holding our representatives accountable, and also creating a strategy and a policy that will help us in our community, that if even though we're not working with them directly, when we're working in our neighborhoods and our schools and in our county areas, our mayors of our towns, how are we holding them accountable? How are we getting involved and going and showing up at the city council meetings and at those local elections, that we can help people to be empowered? Because now we see somebody who is in office who looks like us, and we see that there's a critical state in our country now that we have the voice and we can make change. And I think that's something that we need to recognize at all levels of this in policy and elections across the country, from local all the way to federal government.
Absolutely, incredibly well said. And if you have friends and family members who live in the state of Georgia, you can still do your part by encouraging them to get out and vote. Voter registration, the deadline for voter registration in this runoff election is December 7th. So that's in just a few days, and then early voting for the runoff begins December 14th. So if you are a resident of Georgia, or you know someone who is, have a conversation with them. You know, you don't have to get in their business about who they're running for, but you can educate and empower them to activate, to respond, and to let their voice be heard, particularly through their vote. Now, this is Black Life Amplified, right? Too Black, too strong, too powerful. So I'm going to take a minute, since we're talking about Atlanta, and I have to just say this. I love, well, we're talking about Georgia, but I love Atlanta in particular, right? Got a lot of family there. Atlanta is different. And Adrienne, I need your help in helping me understand this. How can we support our loved ones in Atlanta from a COVID perspective? Because I have watched the versus battle with Gucci Mane and Jeezy. I have watched the birthday party for Reginae Carter, Lil Wayne's daughter. And I also watched the Real Housewives of Atlanta. In all three scenarios, I see large gatherings of Black people without masks on still to this day. Now in the state of Minnesota, most of our community I see being, you know, masked up and people being very responsive, but I see that it varies from region to region. So as we are doing the work to communicate with our loved ones across the country about staying civically engaged, we are still in a pandemic. How do we communicate to them that they have to do their part to participate and be responsible also?
You know, that has been the hardest part of my job, is making people understand, one, that it's important, why it's important, and why they should just do it. And so as people know, I did go on a little sabbatical to Florida last week. And it was wonderful. We got on the plane, everybody kept their mask on, and then we got to the Atlanta airport, and I thought, you know, there's the Bojangles. I would love to have some Bojangles. And so I was standing in line to get my food, and every single worker in that Bojangles had their mask below their nose. And I was standing in a line and I said, there is no way in heck I'm eating this food when these people aren't even following the basic guidelines. I don't know if they are spreading COVID in the food, you know? So rather than be upset and just complain about it, I promptly sat down, found their corporate office, and sent them an email. And I said, you know, here's the situation, and I really need you to work with your employees so they understand the importance of following the guidelines and doing the right thing, you know? And, you know, I could have walked up to them and told them to put their mask on, but one, I've learned the hard way that even when I do it in a more maternal fashion, you know, or a sisterly fashion to people, it is not received well. You know, I get the attitudes and the, well, who are you to tell me what to do? And, you know, and so I have kind of backed off from that, just because of, and not because I'm afraid, but because it's not effective. And so, you know, I don't know what's going on down there, because my family, we've been very clear, you know, I didn't see them at all during Thanksgiving, even though I was down there. We have a very good understanding of what to do and what not to do. And so I just don't understand the young people who think it's okay to party together. It's like, how many times do we have to say that you're the problem? You know, you get it. You're not that sick, but you spread it to grandma and uncle and auntie, and they're the ones who are getting sick and going in hospitals and the ICUs and dying from it. And I just don't know, you know, at some point, some adult somewhere in their lives has got to step up and take responsibility. And I think that's the biggest problem, is that the adults that are engaged with these young people are also not on the right page. And so they are feeding into this misinformation and the myths and the thoughts that, you know, oh, well, it doesn't affect Black people. And it's like, okay, but we've told you multiple times that we are disproportionately impacted. Why are you not getting it? So I don't have the answer. You know, I would like to walk around like my mother. You know, I grew up in Georgia. I'm born and raised in Georgia, and in an all-Black neighborhood. And, you know, one of the things that I think lent itself to our success is that you are everybody's child, okay? And if Tabitha's mother saw that you were doing something wrong, she had free reign to just grab you and spank you if needed, you know? Teachers were allowed to paddle you if you were out of line, and we don't do that anymore. We have gotten so far from that. And so, you know, I personally, you know, I think I've spanked my children maybe once in their lifetime. And I don't know why. I was just blessed. I started doing the counting thing. You know, my mother used to count for me 1, 2, and you never got to 3. And so I just started doing it with my children, and by some miracle, they got it. So I never had to spank them, but they understood there were consequences to their actions. And, you know, we're just not seeing that in our community, especially down south. You know, they don't understand the consequences of their actions, and I don't know why, because our people are the ones who are in the hospital and dying and getting really sick. And so I think we just have to keep, you know, putting that message out there, but also we have to push forward with holding people accountable. So I'm sure that me sending that email to Bojangles did not go over well with those employees, but I'm sure Bojangles responded. And if I find out they haven't, you know, my daughter picks at me all the time. She's like, why are you on Facebook? Nobody's on Facebook, but people are on Facebook. And I have been known to use social media to get organizations to be aware of issues that may exist. And nobody likes to be, you know, have social media used to get their attention. So, yeah, we just have to keep holding people accountable, and hopefully they will get it eventually. I doubt that it's going to happen anytime soon, but yeah, I've seen some of those pictures on social media that you've seen, Brittany, and I'm just like, what is wrong with our people? I don't know why they don't get it. But again, the adults that are around the young people also don't get it. So you have this cascading effect where the adults are saying, oh, it's okay, you know, just do what you want to do. So then the young people are doing it, and it's kind of this bi-directional irresponsibility. So I don't have the answer. Just stay away from Atlanta.
Well,
May I offer another lens?
Yes, please share.
Yeah, you know, just being, you know, 25, I have a little want to offer the lens that I see from my perspective. And, you know, the truth is that for a lot of people who are Gen Z and millennials, young millennials, I do see a lot of them taking responsibility. But there are definitely portions of our community that are going out and, you know, partying or XYZ, just, you know, feeling like they do not have that responsibility to uphold. And I think that's kind of the lens that we have to definitely educate people on. And also, you know, just educating my generation that you can, not only can you get COVID, COVID can kill you. So like COVID is something that it is very, is so, I think that was the thing. That was the first thing that came out of like misinformation, was that the young kids, yeah, they got COVID, but they were always asymptomatic or something like that. And yes, we do see that. But my generation, I have friends who have heart problems. I have, you know, friends who are my age who have lung problems. I have friends who are my age that for the last decade, they've been juuling. You know, they've been smoking on the jewel. And, you know, that actually now we know has an impact on your lungs during a respiratory illness. So, you know, I do think that also there's what we're seeing too is that there's also a pandemic of depression and anxiety that's happening amongst the younger generation, right? And one of the major impacts of depression and anxiety that we know is that it actually inhibits some of your decision-making capabilities in your mind, right? And so things of consequences, things of long-term consequences, sometimes also the myopic sense of selfishness, you know, and narcissism, that is also things that are symptoms of, you know, ongoing, lasting, long-term depression and anxiety. So, you know, I do want to put a little different lens on it too, that there are, you know, systemic issues of misinformation, disinformation. There are issues of that this pandemic and this economic crisis and this housing crisis have also amplified, you know, feelings of despair, of hopelessness, of depression, of anxiety that also feed into this. Now, I would also say, you know, so I know a lot of people who live alone, and living alone, particularly, I went to college in New York. So when I was living in New York, my room was less than 300 square feet, right? Like my area, that is the normal, you know, area for people who are living in small, compact areas, you know, compact apartments, dorms, XYZ. And, you know, that is really difficult. It's really difficult on your mental health, on your physical health to be so constrained. And so I do think that there are other issues on top of it that amplify and that actually, you know, I say, yeah, I'm gonna try to get out of my apartment today, and whatever that means, you know, I don't care because I didn't even think I'd live this long, you know. So there are people who think like that. There are people in my generation who actually think like that. And even when we're talking about the uprising that happened, some of the risky behavior that people were taking, they were taking because, you know, literally they said racism is going to kill me anyway. And that is something we have to deal with because that's scary and that's sad.
Yes. Yes, so very well said. And it's not just our community, right? You see people of all ethnicities throwing parties and barbecues and having large family gatherings at Thanksgiving, despite the warnings against it, right? But there is something to the way in which our community, in particular, as the Black community, responds to warnings from health officials and the historical relationship that we've had. We've spoken many times over the course of this conversation about the importance of having relationships with your elected officials, as well as with the entities that have a significant impact on the overall health and well-being of our communities. And those entities also need to continue to do the work so that when they do deliver a message or a warning of COVID-19, that people can actually take it seriously, especially those communities who have been disproportionately impacted and historically marginalized the most. So thank you, Angela, for that context. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this conversation by just asking Anika and Cindy, in 1 minute or less, what are the issues around public policy that our community should be paying attention to over the next 4 years? Anika, I'll start with you.
Yes, absolutely. I would say to engage with the Minneapolis NAACP branch. Through Angela's leadership, we're actually going to be developing a public policy agenda. So that's a way to get involved through our branch. Also, I'm super excited to see public policy come about around reparative justice, reimagining public safety, as we know during these times, as policing has been the epicenter of our conversations, as well as, you know, some of the work that has already existed at the Capitol, the Black maternal health. I'm super excited about your leadership, Brittany, with Trill Moms and Gray Matter, and you could talk more about that. We still have African-American Preservation or African-American Family Preservation Act through Khalees Houston, and we have so much more policy. But if you come along and become a member of the Minneapolis NAACP or come to our meetings, you'll hear so much more about how we plan to move public policy forward.
Thank you. And Cindy, 1 minute or less.
So from the lens of healthcare, if the election is favorable, then we need to pay attention to the social determinants of Healthcare Act, that hopefully that bill can pass and move forward, because it will help us tremendously across all entities in our organizations, that we can provide funding to address disparities that impact our communities. The other thing is with the rate of sustainability for funding opportunities for centers like mine, where I work, for federally qualified health centers, to be able to provide a greater impact of dollars that come into our organization. We don't get a ton of cash. We do get some cash, but to broaden that safety net will be awesome for us from a public policy lens.
Absolutely. And for more information, of course, you can continue to watch this virtual town hall series as we can continue to think about the collective impact of the Black community and how we continue to apply pressure to our elected officials and to advocate for the needs and wants of our community moving forward. I want to thank you, panelists, for investing so much time in your day to preparing and for showing up and showing out. Black women continue to be at the forefront of our movements. And it's important to mention that our Black men are doing the same as well. You know, we mentioned George Floyd, and we don't want that to be the only Black man whose name we uplift, right? But it goes without saying, especially with today's conversation, how impactful the work of Black women has been. And I just thank you all for your commitment to community and the various ways in which you show up and show out. And I want to thank you all who are viewing this at home and participating in the chat. Thank you all for participating and for giving us your feedback and your energy as well. I want to say special thank you to the people who helped make this town hall possible, all of our partner organizations, North Point Children's Minnesota, Insight News, the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, Minnesota Community Care, and of course the African American Leadership Forum, as well as our sponsors, the Minneapolis Foundation, North Point Health and Wellness, as well as Children's Minnesota, who sponsor this town hall and make it possible. I want to invite you all to come back in 2 weeks for our conversation. We're gonna hopefully talk to some journalists and really just wrap up 2020, everything that this year has been. I know it's felt like 10 years sometimes, but there's a lot to be learned and a lot to be said about what we've experienced over the past year. And so it'll be our final town hall of the year, and it'll be a great opportunity for us to really reflect on how far we've come and the work that we have yet to do. My name is Brittany L. Wright with Insight News. It has been an absolute pleasure to share virtual space with you all. And until next time, please be good to yourself, be good to others, wear your mask, and we don't have to socially distance, but make sure we are physically distancing and staying connected as best as we can in virtual space. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next time.